Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Rosierlo, he was having the most amazing dream. He was walking through the shattered remains of Bravos, choosing which of the many naked women that had been paraded in front of him that he would sleep with that night. So much choice. So many humiliated Bravosi. So many amazing tits. It was then, naturally, that he came awake. He looked around wildly, his hand under the pillow where he kept a dagger. There was someone in the room with him. Who? It was then that someone coughed gently from the door. Magister? Oh, it was Raff, his steward. There had better be a good reason behind you waking me up. The man nodded seriously, and he felt his heart sink a little. Yes, he would not have done so otherwise. There is a fire in the city. Magister Malpatis's house is aflame on its lower southern floors. Shock roiled through him, and he jumped out of bed. There was a robe nearby, and he put it on quickly as he hurried to the window and peered out. Sure enough, there was a glow coming from the building at the top of the hill. Then he realized which direction the wind was coming from, and he knew in an instant why Raff had woken him up. The wind's blowing in the direction of the harbor, he said tersely, and then hurried back to where his clothes were kept. Rose of the household, every servant you can find. Send word to the city watch. I want a chain of buckets set up from the sea to that house. He was pulling on clothes, almost without thinking about what he was choosing. There was a time to be fashionable. That time was not now. Raff absorbed his instructions, and then ran off. Good. The man knew what was at stake. If the fire took full hold on that bluff above the harbor, well, it would be a disaster. Ships were notoriously prone to fire. All that canvas, all that sailcloth, all that tar, all that wood afire near the harbor, with all those sparks and hot ash drifting down. He finished dressing himself and then left the room at the closest he'd come to a run for many years. As he passed down the corridor, he could hear Raff shouting orders and the sound of feet running in all directions. Magister, the watch have been told. Many are coming. Raff shouted, and he nodded in response. Buckets. We need buckets. Anything that can hold water. Thank the seven they were near the sea. The gardens of Maupetis's manse would not look doof afterwards, with so much seawater, but he didn't give a damn about that. And so he flung himself onto a horse and rode off up the hill. Looking back on it later, he was amazed that was not more horse by the time that the sun finally started to show itself in the east. The previous hours had been filled with shouting and not a little swearing of frantic decisions made after periods of thought that measured bare heartbeats of desperation and anger and sadness when reports came of losses. But it had all worked. Yes, a third of the manse was a gutted shell, and another third had fire damage in many areas, but the remaining third was still intact, and above all, nothing had caught fire in the harbor. Some of the ships closest to the danger had been warped out by worried captains, but no ship had burned nor any other building. He'd had casks of clean water and some of cold ale brought up for the men and women around him, and now he was holding a tankard of ale in one hand and a piece of bread and ham in the other. The bread was fresh, the ale was cold, and even though this was food that he would normally have scorned by the gods, today it felt like the finest meal he'd ever had. As he finished the food and swigged the last of the ale, he saw Rock approach. With his was a smoke-blackened man who looked like one of the Unsullied here, and also a young woman. All bowed as they reached him. Magister Rock said, "We have confirmed that Magister Malpatis is dead." He nodded shortly. This had been what he had suspected for some time. After seeing that Malpatis wasn't present anywhere at all during the fighting of the fire, a man like Malpatis would have been everywhere. Bellowing orders, his absence had meant only one thing. How? Raff looked at the girl. Tell him. I am Tyrese, Magister, the girl all but stammered. She looked tired beyond words, and had a look in her eyes that he had seen before. A look of someone who had seen terrible things. Magister Malpatis was killed by Viserys Targaryen. He stared at her in astonishment. The Beggar King? For what reason? The Magister said that he was mad, and he was. Hallease vanished. The Magister's under-steward fled, we thought. Then last night, the Beggar King found me near his sister's quarters. I turned to the door, and he must have hit me. When I awoke, I was in a room, and Hallease was there too, but he was dead. Throat cut. The girl looked down at the ground, her face working with memory. Go on, Raff encouraged her gently. All of it. Then the beggar king came in again. He had his sister. She was tied up and lacked her wits. He laid her down next to me. When she woke up, he said that he needed our blood, that he needed dragons and that he didn't care how he'd get them, even blood. He was mad, Magister. He made no sense. Then he went off to get something to collect our blood. Horror had overtaken him, and he stared at her. Everyone in earshot of the girl was doing the same thing. He'd known that Mopades had been getting worried about the stability of the boy king. But this was beyond madness. The Magister found us then. He'd been searching after discovering the princess missing. He cut the bonds on her hands. But then her brother came back and hit the Magister on the head with a bowl or something and knocked him out. He was saying mad things again. Mad things. But then the Magister woke up. He was so angry with the beggar king. He started to choke him, but the boy had a dagger, and he fought back. And they fought, oh how they fought, and they knocked over lanterns, and something caught. The fire started, and they fell into it. He shuddered at that. Death by fire, that was no way for anyone to die. That was too horrible for words. And the princess, Daenerys shook her head, tears spilling down her face. She freed me, Magister. She picked up a dagger that had been dropped and she freed me, got me out. But then she went back in for her dragon eggs, and the fire cut her off. I last saw her in a room to one side. We've cleared a way to it. Magister, Wrath said quietly. There won't be much to see there by now. The fire was fierce there. We think that oil for cooking was being stored there. He nodded slowly. Well, this was a fine kettle of fish. Still, what could one expect from the only remaining son of the Mad King? Death by fire. How very apt. Historians would make bad puns about it in their books. It was a shame that Pantes would be mentioned, but running feet brought him out of his ruminations. Magister, come quick. You must see this. It was one of the guards, and he looked, well, terrified. Come and see what? We found Daenerys Stormborn, and then he was gone again, running like a madman. Frowning, he followed, walking, with Wraith and Tyrese behind him. They passed through a still-smoking doorway, past a pile of blackened timbers that was still steaming slightly from the water that had been poured over it, and then along what had once been a corridor. The room that they entered lacked a roof and also 3 walls, apart from a stone one that marked an internal buttress. Some stone steps arched up to one side, and, oh, there were 2 bodies there. Or what might have been bodies. He could see that one pile was a little bigger than the other. But that bone had splintered and skulls had cracked from the heat. There were a few men and women staring at something under the stairs, though, and he sighed and strode up. And then he saw what was there, and his mind refused to accept it for a long moment. Daenerys Targaryen was sitting there. Ashes had streaked her bare skin. She was as naked as the day she had been born, and her arms were crossed in front of her chest. Her eyes were closed, and she appeared to be asleep. Tyrese gasped to one side, and he heard Raph say something under his breath. But it was at that point that the world tilted still further. Her arms had been hiding something. On the underside of her right arm was a little green and bronze creature. On the underside of her other arm was a little white and gold creature. Both seemed to be suckling from her nipples. And then a small form seemed to register their approach from her shoulder, where it had been hiding under her hair. A black and red creature that hissed a little and then flapped its wings. Dragons. He was looking at dragons. The word rang through his mind, and he resisted the temptation to let his jaw drop open. Instead, he rallied. Princess? No reaction. Daenerys Stormborn. Her eyes flicked open, and just for a moment he saw nothing but silver light in those eyes. Robert. The trees were flying past again. Was he running, or was he being pulled by some means or other? He could not tell. All he knew that he was so close to catching her. Lyanna. She was just in front of him, hair over her face, screaming something at him. She was terrified of something. Was it Rilgar pulling her? Where were they? Was it in the north? There were just the trees to go by. And the snow? He stretched his hand out in a desperate effort at grabbing her. So close, less than the span of a man's hand. So close, relax, Lyanna. He reached again, and missed. Her face worked with terror again, and then suddenly she was gone, pulled in an unimaginably long way in front of him in an instant. He slowed and looked about wildly. For an instant he thought he could see a little face amidst the trees, and then he turned around and looked at the blue-eyed thing that might once have been human that was peering at him in what looked like horror. Yadana! He came awake in his bed with a shout, his chest heaving as if he had been running for hours. His hands were shaking and he was covered in sweat. After a long moment, he sighed and ran his hands over his face. The third time that week. Why? What did it mean? He got out of bed and strode to the window. Dawn was close. He could try to sleep again. At least Cersei wasn't there, with her sharp elbows and sharper tongue, but he knew that it would be folly to try and sleep again. He dressed quickly, picked up Stormbreaker, and then strode from the room. Outside, Cerberus was asleep on a chair by the door, and Robert glared at him with contempt. Cersei's man, he was. A Lannister man. Why had he agreed to have that craven lazy fool on his Kingsguard again? Well, he would be hopefully shamed by the realization that his king had left the room without him noticing. He strode off down the dark corridors. It was quiet at this hour. A man could think that this hour. He reached the stairs and padded down them quietly. More training today. More arrangements. Cersei wasn't happy about the move to Winterfell. He'd been tempted to shout her down. Instead, he just coldly told her that it was happening, no matter what she said, and that it had to happen. She'd been puzzled by that, before moving on to how much she hated the cold and how much dear Joffrey hated the cold, and so on and so forth. Not that it had made a damn bit of difference, just as her protests about Stannis becoming Hand had also not made the least difference. All of her shouted comments about Tywin Lannister being an excellent Hand in the past had not worked, and she'd eventually stormed off. He reached the throne room. Had he meant to come here, or was it simply where his feet had led him? He peered at the throne itself, and then shook his head and leant against the nearest pillar. Why was he dreaming of Lyanna so much? What was happening with those dreams? Were they just dreams, or something more? The Iron Throne squatted there in the half-light, looking like a demented vision of a normal chair dreamt up by a madman. He often wondered how much blood was on it, from the nicks and scratches that the swords it had been made from, and how much of that blood had been that of Aerys. He stared at it with blank eyes. For how long, he could not say, and then he looked, almost unwillingly, at the place where the bodies had been deposited by Tywin Lannister's men. When he looked back at the throne again, he saw that someone was watching him. He squinted a little and then relaxed. Ser Barristan, Your Grace. Salmi smiled wryly. You're supposed to be escorted by at least one member of the Kingsguard. Your Grace, I was most annoyed with Somberos when I found him asleep in front of your room. Robert chuckled a little. He was sleeping too peacefully for me to wake him. He sobered a little. I am sorry that my wife insisted on his appointment. Selmy shook his head a little. The Kingsguard make do, Your Grace. He paused. You seemed deep in contemplation. I hope that I did not disturb you. He sighed and then paced over to the dais where the throne was and sat down on the bare stone, Stormbreaker next to him. I could not sleep, not after dreaming of... Well, I could not sleep, so I came here. He shifted a little. Tell me, Ser Barristan, what would Aerys Targaryen have made of all of this? This call that went out, the talk of the others returning, the statues of the Seven, and, well, everything. It was Selmy's turn to sigh as he seemed to think very carefully. It all would have been a plot, Your Grace. Directed at him, naturally. Oh, and your discovery of Stormbreaker would have been an especially treasonous part of that plot. I thought so, he said softly before smiling sourly. I always thought that I'd make a better king than Aerys. Perhaps I have not been the best of kings, but at least this is something that I can take action on. Whatever it is exactly. So hard to tell. Echoes from the past, eh? The old Lord Commander of the Kingsguard smiled slightly. Then he paused as if he had something on his mind before finally saying, May I ask a question, Your Grace? Robert peered at him. There was something odd about his tone. Of course you can, Ser Barristan. Have you been dreaming a lot recently? He seemed to see Lyanna hanging in the air again amidst the trees for a moment. Yes, he said hoarsely. I have. That same damn dream of Lyanna trying to tell me something, and then being pulled away from me. He looked back at the spot where the bodies had been placed on the day that he had entered the Red Keep as king. If only she'd lived. She had a fire in her. You know, such a fire. He looked down at his belly. She wouldn't have let me go to fat the way that I did, until of late, and she would have been horrified at the bodies of the Targaryen children. He knew that without even thinking about it. Not that he could say anything about it. Selmy seemed to think very hard about something, before finally taking a step forwards. Your Grace, after Stormbreaker was found, I wrote to Harvest Hall, to my great-nephew Lord Arstan Selmy, about certain records that my father had once mentioned. I remembered his tale of them only in passing. After much thought, 'twas said that House Selmy was close once to House Durrandon, but I did not remember the full details. Arstan sent me a copy of the history of my house, the private one, known only to we Selmys, and it mentions Stormbreaker. Curiosity kindled in his heart. Why didn't you say anything of this before? I mentioned it in passing, Your Grace, but all I remembered was bits and pieces of what my father told me. Arstan's copy of the history arrived yesterday. I was up most of the night reading it. I might have some answers for you, Your Grace, but I am still puzzling some things out. Robert beckoned him over, and Selmy sat on the raised dais by the throne, Robert with Stormbreaker now over his own lap. Go on, he said eagerly. What answers? Selmy ran a hand over his chin and then seemed surprised for a moment, as if he had only just realized that he needed a shave. My ancestor, Sire Amris Selmy, was sword-bearer to King Argalic Durrandon himself. Your Grace, sworn to be near him at all times, he said quietly, but he did not die at the last storm. According to the record that Arstan sent me, King Argalic sent him back to Storm's End. Then he paused. The record stated that the day before the battle, King Argalic had a dream, a very terrible one. He never told my ancestor what exactly he had dreamt of, just that he had seen his own death, that Stormbreaker deserved a better fate, and that it was all down to his daughter now to preserve the line of the Storm Kings. So he sent Emrys Selmy back to Storm's End with a sword. Stormbreaker. He ran a hand over the hilt. He gave away his own sword? Your Grace. He paused. You asked about dreams. 'Tis said that the Durrandons would often have dreams. Prophetic dreams. I do not know if there is a link to Stormbreaker or not, but if you are dreaming strange dreams when you did not before, then there might be some link there. Robert stroked his own chin, discovering that he, too, needed a shave. That Stormbreaker deserved a better fate. What might that mean, then? I won. He stopped in mid-word and stared at Selby. And then he stared at the Iron Throne, that monstrosity of melted steel swords. Could he have meant that? He choked the words out. Samly went white. After a moment of silence, he nodded jerkily. Perhaps, Your Grace. Perhaps. What else did the book say? Just that one day a Selmy would be sword-bearer again for a new Storm King. Robert snorted. Sword-bearer is too low a title for you, Sir Barristan. If my ancestors served the Storm Kings of old, then I will be glad to serve the Storm King of now. An odd look crossed his face. We live in times that are almost out of a song, Your Grace. Strange times indeed, he replied. What did it mean, though? He stood. Keep reading, Sir Barristan. Keep reading. Now, I have an appointment with a log and the training yard, after which we will spar for a bit. Tyrion! He looked at the page in front of him and then made yet another note on the parchment to his right. It was yet another unpleasant legend about the Night Fort. What fun! At the rate he was collecting them, he'd be unable to approach the place due to the number of dead bodies surrounding the place. Why there, though? Why was the old headquarters of the Night's Watch so important? And why were there so many terrible stories about the place? Was it haunted? He thought about Grumpkins and Snarks for a moment and came close to scoffing. But then he remembered the red fire in the eyes of Jon Stark. That had been no mummer's trick. If that could happen, well, what else was there? Ghosts? He sighed and then turned the page. It was then that he sensed that he was being watched, and he looked up. Brodesi, Surestone was standing there, one eyebrow raised and a plate of food in one hand. You missed lunch, she chided. So I brought you some. He stared at her and then looked out of the window. Oh, yes, the sun had passed its zenith. Oh my, he muttered, as his stomach took the opportunity to complain quite loudly. Yes, I am hungry. Thank you, Lady Surestone. The plate contained some fresh bread and some ham, as well as some kind of pickled thing. It was remarkably tasty. As he ate Daisy, Surestone looked through the books he had scattered around him. She was making noises of interest and possibly concern by the end of her perusal, which ended as he swallowed the last crumb and repressed a belch. The Night Fort. You're researching the oldest castle on the wall. I am, he sighed. I will be traveling there soon. Well, soonish. Thank you for the food, by the way. Ned noticed that you weren't at lunch. She peered at his notes. As did I. You didn't miss much, apart from the leaders of mountain clans of the Vale doing their best to eat in polite company. Lady Stark's face was a picture. He stared at her as if she had grown a second head. I beg your pardon? Mountain clans? Vale, here. They even have a banner, that of the Griffin King. She sniffed a little. I wish my father had been here. You would have been taking notes for a week. Though, he was still staring at her. The mountain clans of the Vale came all the way to Winterfell. Then his brain caught up with his mouth. First men, of course, they're first men. But then further pieces clanged into place in his brain. The people who forded the Green Fork, that was them. They came all the way up here to fight the others. His voice was heading upwards, as were his eyebrows. Yes, she replied, to all of your questions. He leant back in his chair and reeled, mentally, at least. The implications were astonishing. If such people were leaving the Vale to fight for Stark against the others, this was something that father would find deeply alarming. He needed to think very hard about if he should tell him. Fascinating, he muttered. Fascinating. Yes, indeed. She was staring at him. You seem to be taking all of this in your stride. Well, sort of. Why do you need to go to the Night Fort? After a moment of furious thought about the mountain clans, her question finally trickled into his brain, and he looked at her. Ah, did you hear about my little encounter with Jon Stark? I did. She looked at him very solemnly as she sat down to one side. The old gods spoke to you. They did. I very nearly needed the privy in a hurry, but at least it proved that they existed. Exist. Whatever. He paused to marshal his thoughts, failed for a moment, but then pressed on. It seems that I, as a descendant of Lane Casterly, Lane the Loyal and Clever or something, and can't you just hear the capital letters there? Need to go to the Night Fort, hence the research, and also the quiet panic. You certainly seem to be intermittently loquacious, which is unlike you. She looked at the next set of books and then pulled a slight face. Oh dear, a history of the infamous Night's Queen at the Night Forts by Archmaester Chevialfin. Not a bad historian. Horrible writer, better than his book on sieges, though. Spotty at best. His eyebrows flew up again. You have read very widely. Then he saw her own raised eyebrow. Ah, of course. Surestone has a large library. Very large. She sobered a little. Vodal at least saw no profit in books. I was able to get it sealed up tightly. No damp shall damage those books. Is there any word from River Run? Not yet. When word does come, well, I will have to set things right at my home, and Boodle will pay. Ned said that he'd made sure of that. He nodded at her. I think that Lord Stark will make very sure of that. As indeed he should. He fidgeted a little for a moment. Has Lord Stark finished your father's book yet? Almost. Ned's not much of a reader. Or at least he wasn't much of a reader. I think that a lot has changed recently. She said the words almost carefully. The sad thing is that it's almost a good thing that Ned's in charge in Winterfell and not Brandon. He could be temperamental and not much of a reader at all. So I have heard, Tyrion said judiciously. Then he sighed. A lot of people seem to be doing that around him of late. So, when this Boodle person is brought to justice, you will return to Surestone. Perhaps. Ned needs my help on some of the older records. She shivered just a little. The long night comes, so I will advise and copy out records if need be. As the last Surestone, she rolled her eyes. Aye, Cat keeps dropping hints that she can matchmake for me. Folly. He peered at her with upraised eyebrows. You doubt Lady Stark's abilities at matchmaking? Daisy Surestone leant back in her chair. This time she rolled her eyes the other way. Cat has been here in the north for many years now, but she is still a Tully to her fingertips. A southerner, I doubt that she understands our ways properly at times. I love her dearly. She can be very kind, but she is still from the south. She has 2 daughters and, well, see the contrast there. Sansa has been brought up to a southern flower, whilst Arya is Lyanna come again. If she is a flower, then she is all thorns. She snapped her fingers. I forgot, you missed something else. Sansa Stark is betrothed to Demeric Bolton. Ned made the formal declaration at lunch, with the Leech Lord standing next to him. More peering. You are not fond of Rose Bolton, then? She laughed a little. Once you have read about the Stark-Bolton Wars for the 10th or so time, then a certain amount of dislike can be detected, especially as I am part Stark myself. Although I must admit that Demeric Bolton seems very unlike his father. He may resemble him in looks, but in character, not at all. She paused and then nodded a little. As a sign of unity, it's well needed, and perhaps Demeric will remake the Dreadfort with Sansa at his side. It's good to be optimistic, is it not? He thought for a long moment about Casterly Rock and his father. Yes, he said softly. It is good to be optimistic. He looked at her for a moment, and then smiled a little. So, perhaps you can help me sort out what is real and what is legend from all of this. Why does the Night Fort provoke such fear and fantastic stories? I mean, look at all this. Tales of the Rat Cook and Prince and Bacon Pie. How lovely. And a madman called Mad Axe, who killed his brothers of the Night's Watch. And the tale of the apprentice boys against something very eloquently called the Thing That Came in the Night. Oh, and the Night's King. That's a tale to make your eyebrows go up and down. Tyrion sighed and then ran a hand over his forehead before frowning. Actually, that last tale is the oddest. There is no reference anywhere else to even the existence of females or others. They were always referred to as having the appearance of men, except in this one specific case. Why? Daisy pursed her lips a little in thought. Father wondered the same thing, she said, eventually. He theorized that the Night's King did not have a consort who was a female other, but that instead he fell in love with a woman who worshipped the others. He stared at her. Why would people do that? She shrugged at him. It might go back to the Long Night, the last time that the others were as widespread as they ever were. Worshipping them might have been seen as a way to try and appease them. Well, perhaps make them attack non-worshippers first. An interesting thought. In the other stories, there was a pause as she stroked her chin for a moment. I think that the Night Fort is a place that gathers such stories because of its history. I think that something terrible must have happened there once. Something terrible enough to leave an impression that has lasted many centuries. That said, it was in use until just a few centuries ago. He directed a long look at her. I am not entirely sure if I should be terrified or reassured at the thought of going there now. Both, I think. She looked back at him. When are you going there? I'm not entirely sure. She pursed her lips a little, and he could tell that she was pondering on this. I am willing to bet that it will be sooner than you think. I have a feeling that things are starting to happen, and that they will take a lot of people by surprise. All of a sudden, he needed a very large goblet of wine. Crescent. There could be times when it was hard to sleep in his chambers, when the wind came from the north in a certain strength. Then sometimes it set up a low rumbling shriek through certain passages. Tonight the wind was shrieking more than usual, and eventually he gave up and got up. As he dressed, he cocked his head to one side. Yes, the wind really was howling, and perhaps there was a storm coming. He sighed and then padded down the corridor, opened the small door at the end, and then entered the main passageway. Yes, there was a storm coming. The wind was strong, and he hurried down the corridor and turned the corner to the stairs. He was getting old. He had to admit that as he huffed up the stairs, his knees and ankles complaining more than a bit. He paused when he reached the top, took a deep breath of air, and then walked down the corridor. Opening the door at the other end, he peered out at the dark room beyond and the great stone arches. The wind was roaring outside, and a gust wrenched his hair all askew. He could hear the sound of waves breaking somewhere not too far away. A high tide then, higher than he had predicted. The fleet should be all right, though. Dragonstone was a good anchorage for a storm from the north. He looked at the opening to the outside world. On a fine day, you could see for miles. Tonight was different. The moon would appear and then disappear, as clouds scudded over its face. Occasionally something flickered on the northern horizon. Yes, there was indeed a storm there. It was only then that he slowly became aware of the noise. Someone somewhere was screaming in the far distance. Disconcerted, he turned and looked behind him. There was something terrible about that scream. It was the scream of someone who was in torment. Moreover, it was a scream that came and then went as if that person was running around. As he pondered whether or not to investigate, he heard booted feet approach. It was Harry's, the second under-castellan, and he looked like a man who had reached the end of his tether. Master Crescent, what is that noise? Who is making that awful noise? It's the jester, Master Cresson. The fool Patchface. He's gone mad, running all over the place and screaming all kinds of wild things. He winced. He had been long afraid of this. He had always wondered what might happen to set the poor creature off. He was bad enough at the best of times, with his nonsensical songs and shouted rhymes, and of late he had been odder than usual. He had barely been eating for a start, and his skin was starting to sag on him. Take me to him. They found Patchface in the Great Hall, the idiotic place that had been built in the shape of a dragon. A small group of servants and guards were huddled by the main doors, whispering amongst themselves. They fell silent as Cresson approached. But he could still hear the whoops and curses and shouted nonsense within the room. Patchface, what is going on? Cresson barked as he looked through the doors carefully. The others looked at each other, and one of the older guards took a step forwards. Big pardon, Maester. Bite the fool's mad. Well, madder than usual. Ran past me, screaming something about dragons waking up, and then turned around like a child's top and screamed something else about the old cold ones coming. Next thing I know, he's gone, screaming as he went. We finally forced him into here. Cresson finally caught sight of a slumped figure at the base of the chair where Lord Stannis normally ate. He nodded. Stay here, he said softly. I'll talk to him. He seems to have quieted now. He walked in slowly, watching the motionless fool carefully. His clothes were disheveled and his head hung low, his chin almost on his chest. As Cresson approached, he looked up, his head shaking. Do you hear them? The fool spoke in a voice almost too low to hear. Cresson paused and then sat in a seat. Hear who? Cresson. Oh, I hear them. Cresson. Oh, sharp teeth and narrow eyes and flames in their gullets. They are awake again, at last. Dragons. Oh, dragons. He peered worriedly at the man. Patchface's eyes were closed and he seemed to be weeping. Dragons, he said, the word carefully. Dragons. It was a whisper. Then his head snapped up and his eyes opened, and Cresson swallowed as he saw the eyes of the fool. They were very wide and very mad. There seemed to be little sanity in them, and that is not all. He fights again. He twists. He scowls. He weakens. He hears the other voices, the voices that he thought he killed. Oh, so many voices. He denies them. Denies. Oh. Who, Patchface? Cresson asked gently. The fool twisted his face away a moment, and then back and forth, before wrenching himself to one side and then pulling himself to his feet. His face worked, and then something seemed to ripple through it, just for a moment. Can't you hear them all? All the voices? They sing, oh no, argue. Dark things come. Terrible things from the north. From the prison. From the place no one can ever see. And in the depths the white things come. To slither and quiver and wail at what has been done to them. Wail and rail against their collars. Pushed south to the wall and death. The fool was almost shouting now, panting as he spat the words out. Calm yourself, Cresson said as soothingly as he could. Calm yourself. No. Patchface howled as he clawed at his face for a moment. There is not time. No time, Cresson. They come and they press and they scream. The other power waxes in the hidden places, even here, the roots and the branches. But is it enough? Is it? Trees heal and stone kills and north talks to south. Is it enough? I do not know. No one knows. Everything has changed. The young wolf lives. The white wolf will not take the black. I don't care if he's a bastard. Ned Stark's blood runs through his veins. Grainseers. The fool clawed at his face again, leaving bloody red marks as his nails bit into his skin. They come by snow and ice. They must be beaten back. Swords for the north. The east fails. Eyes north. And then he screamed and clawed at his temples before stumbling around. And then he ran. He ran like a madman, arms flopping everywhere, gait uncertain at first, but then he tore out of the doors, bowling people over by the sound of the startled oaths. By the time that Cresson made it to the doors, Patchface had vanished from sight. Where did he go to? That way, Harris said, pointing a trembling finger. He's gone mad, hasn't he? Aye, find him before he harms himself, or anyone else. They went scattering as they fanned out down the various passageways and doors. Cresson paused, and then he thought hard, before walking off down the corridor that he had used to get to the Great Hall. He had an inkling. There were times when he had found Patchface in the room that he had been in earlier, And true enough, he was right. The fool was standing in one of the great stone arches. He was as still as a statue, even though the blood was trickling down his face from his self-inflicted wounds. Harris had followed Crescent and seemed to be about to take a step forwards when Crescent held up a hand and then gestured for him to step back. Then he himself stepped forwards. Thunder rumbled somewhere to the north, and lightning jabbed into the sea a long way away. Patchface, come down from there, please. The Lady Shireen is very fond of you. It will upset her if you fell. It matters not, Patchface replied in a voice that almost sounded sane and normal. It's too late. What is too late? Even if glued back together, a broken jug cannot contain water again. Tell Shireen to seek out the godswood. The fool turned his face to look at Crescent. Thank you. You have been a good friend to me. I know that others told you to let me die, but it's time to go now. A life for a life, you see. Crescent's eyes widened and he darted forwards, but it was too late. The fool stepped forwards swiftly into the air and then fell into the darkness. Crescent and Harris dashed to the archway and stared down into the depths below as the wind howled around them. But of the fool there was not a sign. Robb? Grey Wind was still a little unsteady on his paws at times, especially when he was tired. Robb looked at him fondly, and then ruffled his fur on his back, before scratching. The little direwolf closed his eyes in ecstasy for a long moment, and then seemed to almost fall asleep, because when Robb stopped scratching, he didn't react. After a moment, though, he seemed to awaken, opened his eyes to give him a sorrowful "Why have you stopped?" look, sneezed, and then shook himself. He grinned for a moment, and then ambled down the corridor towards Father's solar. The door was open, and he peered in. Father was working at his desk, the large amount of paperwork that never seemed to diminish to one side. He knew that it was always new and never old, that Father worked steadily to keep it that way, but when he tried to imagine himself doing it, well, his imagination failed him. The closest he'd come to that had been in the last days of the war, before the wedding at the Twins. So much to organize for the counterattack against the Ironborn, so much to arrange to keep Tywin Lannister off his back. He sometimes wondered, with a wince, what must have happened after his death in that terrible world. Enough. Time to return to this world. He knocked on the doorframe, and then entered at Father's gruff. Come, before closing the door behind him. Grey Wind ambled over towards the fire, yawned again, and then fell asleep. You sent for me, Father? Father leant back in his chair and stretched. Hey, I've come to a decision about the mountain clans from the Vale. An interesting collection, are they not? Aye. He was silent for a moment. When I was being fostered in the Vale, what feels like a very long time ago now, something happened that I'd forgotten about until now. I was traveling to Gulltown on business for Jon Arryn, when I was approached by a lone clansman from the mountain clans, said he had a message for me, from the head of the clan, whose name was Danner. Robb frowned. One of their leaders is Rhys, son of Danner. Could it be the same man? I think so. I mean, to talk to him before he leaves for the Wall. The thing is, I was never able to talk to this danger. There was always something else to do. Jon Arryn didn't want me anywhere near the mountain clans. And now I wish I knew what he had to tell me. A short silence fell. Eventually Robb broke it. You are sending the mountain clans to the Wall? Not quite, sighed Father. I'm sending them to the Gift. They won't be ready for the Wall just yet. And the Gift, well, it will need to be restored. The mountain clans will be able to make a start on that. Besides, I can use them there to prove a point to the Night's Watch. First, that first men are being drawn towards the Wall, and that we'll need the Gift and the new Gift to help prepare before another long winter is on us. We need men and women there to restore centuries of neglect, and they can pave the way for the wildlings. That's the second thing. We need the wildlings now. We need their numbers, we need their hardiness, and we need their skills in existing north of the Wall. If we sent Southerners to the Gift and told them to restore it, half would be dead by the end of the first month of even a short winter, and the mountain clans are near enough to be like wildlings to prepare the way. He stared at his father. This was thinking on a strategic level that he had only partially thought about before. Something of his thoughts must have shown on his face, because Father leant back a little further in his chair and smiled at him. We need to think on a different scale, my son, and we must have plans beyond plans. I'm not just having the broken tower quietly repaired because of, well, something that might never happen. I'm also getting the tower prepared by be fully restored. If disaster strikes, if the others break through the Wall, then they will come here. Why, I do not know. but all the oldest tales tell of the others assaulting Winterfell or the place where Winterfell was founded. Why? Is it the hot springs here, if the wall falls? And may the old gods stop it from happening. Then we will need to defend Winterfell. And every tower, every scrap of wall, every storeroom will play its part. He stood up and then walked over to Robb before placing his hands on Robb's shoulders. We must be ready for anything, and there is something that you must be aware of. I've sent for Jon. You need to be aware of who his mother was, just as he needs to know that the old gods sent you back. All three of us have been touched by them. There must be a reason for that, especially as you and I have a journey to make. Robb stared at Father quizzically. Where to, Father? Castle Black. I am summoning the Lords of the North there. Ice seemed to slide up and down his back for a moment. You are calling the banners? Nah, not just yet. I am summoning the lords there to tell them of my decision, that the others do indeed come, that the wildlings must be allowed south of the gate and into the gift, that the castles on the wall must be repaired and reoccupied, that I am ordering this as the Warden of the North before the South can come to our aid, and that the Night's Watch must accept this. You doubt Lord Commander Mormont? The old bear. Never. The man's a Mormont, and they are northern down to their toenails. I just doubt some of those men under his command. How many heard the call? I know not. They have to know that they have not been abandoned by us, that we will help them to the best of our ability. But the gift must be made ready. The wildlings must be brought south of the wall, and we need proof of whites. I'll be taking that cage with us. Hopefully Benjen has carried out his mission. And yes, I said us. You are coming with me. You fought well in that world that you saw. Now I need to complete your education in other respects. The great Jon, Rose Bolton, and Howland Reed all know how important this is, and will be coming with us. The Karstarks will need to be fully persuaded, as they are cussed beyond belief. The Glovers and the Sarwins will be easily persuaded, Maggie Mormont alike. House Dustin. Well, I've had ravens from both Barbara Dustin and her father, Lord Raiswell, promising every support. I will know the measure of their words. I will summon both to Castle Black. Father walked back to the map. Tyrion Lannister will come with us as well. He has a part to play in this, given the message from the old gods to him. He must go to the Night Fort. Why? I know not. Just that it must happen. A silence fell, which Robb eventually broke. When will we go? In a few days, and we will travel with all speed. Luwin is sending out the ravens even as we speak. Robb nodded, and then knuckles rapped against the door. Enter, Father barked. The door swung open to reveal Jon on the other side. You asked to see me, Father. I did. He paused and rubbed his chin. Jon, Robb, you both have secrets you must tell each other. He sighed and looked at his half-brother. Well, this would be interesting. Jon. He stared at the closed door for a long time. He had an odd feeling that he knew what this was about. Father had hinted a little about it, and he had then worried about it ever since. Rozier Nozied may not have been his actual brother, but he felt as if he was. He had promised to fight at his side. Someday Robb would be Lord Stark of Winterfell, and on that day Jon would lay his sword at his feet and swear to obey him, no matter what. He thought long and hard about the revelation that his real father had been Rhaegar Targaryen, and he'd come to one conclusion: he wanted nothing whatsoever to do with his father's family. They had brought nothing but death, fire, and madness to Westeros. Yes, they'd united the Seven Kingdoms, but the cost... oh, the cost. And then there was the fact that one of his grandfathers had killed his other grandfather, for nothing other than the wings of madness that had been fluttering through the mind of Aerys fucking Targaryen. No. No, he would never accept anything that came from his father's side. He was a Stark now. He'd have a hold somewhere in the north. He'd marry some woman that he would hopefully grow to love, and he would keep his head down, and ready his sword to place at Robb's feet one day. And he needed his brother to be his brother and not to treat him any differently, which was why, if this was the meeting that he had been dreading, he was so nervous. Ghost, who had been sitting by his foot and regarding him gravely, butted his head against his leg as if to encourage him. Jon sighed before looking back at the door, and then finally knocking on it. Enter! Father barked from inside, and he opened the door. Ghost scurrying on before him. As he closed the door behind him, he could see that his direwolf had run up to the fire, where Grey Wind was already asleep. And yes, Robb was standing with Father. He walked up to them. "You asked to see me, Father?" "I did." Father seemed to hesitate for a moment as he rubbed his chin. "Jon, Robb, you both have secrets you must tell each other." And this brought a sigh from Robb, which was odd. Jon looked at his brother. Robb looked as if the weight of the world was suddenly on him. Father placed a hand on his shoulder before doing the same to Robb. "I need you both to listen to me. We are Starks. We are a pack. The pack is weakened when we keep things from each other, even for the best of reasons. Now, this is not going to be easy for either of you, but there is a war coming, and we do not know what will happen. The north wind is going to blow, and I don't know where it might take us. You two need to trust each other, and there's only one way that can happen, with the unburdening of yourselves. Robb has been touched by the old gods, just as you have been, only in his case, more directly." He stared at Father and then at Robb. "More directly? The old gods used me to pass on a message for Tyrion Lannister." Robb smiled wanly. "Oh, they brought me back from the dead." There was a long moment as he stared at Robb. If this was a joke, then it wasn't very funny. Not that Robb seemed to be joking, or even amused. He was pale and wincing slightly, as if some terrible memory was going through his mind. What Jon said eventually, Robb sighed and then ran a hand through his hair. "The old gods brought me back from the moment of my death. I was fated to die in about 2, almost 3 years. At the Twins, there was a war, you see. A terrible war. I did my best, but it wasn't enough, and I died." Eyes wide, he stared at Robb, from the way that he was talking. By the way that Father was watching him with a look of total seriousness on his face. "You died, I died, and I was sent back by the old gods, because everything had gone wrong and the others were coming. There was no warning, nothing. The long night was coming, and I was losing a war in the south. I don't understand. Where was Father whilst all of this was happening?" Father lifted his chin a little. "Me? Oh, I was dead. According to Robb, Jon Arryn died, and King Robert came to Winterfell to make me Hand of the King. So I went south with him to King's Landing, and I died there." Horror stole over him, and he felt his legs quiver. "What?" he whispered. The thought of Father being dead was something that he couldn't even begin to imagine it. To have Father gone from this world, no, it was unbelievable. No, that's not possible." "I'm afraid it is," Father said gently. "How?" "King Robert died. A hunting accident. Prince Joffrey became king. But he's an unstable, proud, stuck-up little piece of shit." Robb spat the last words harshly. Then he looked at Father, who nodded slightly. "And he's not King Robert's son. He's mad because his true father is his own uncle, the Kingslayer. Brother and sister." The words rolled through his mind and he felt nauseous. Just like the Targaryens. If Prince Joffrey's real father is the Kingslayer, then... "Oh, you found out about this, Father." "Apparently I did. And I died because of it. Betrayed from what Robb said. You thought about this. Then Robb must have called the banners to avenge you," he said softly. "I hope that I was at your side." "No," Robb said sadly, and shock roiled through him again. "You weren't." "What? Why? What would have stopped me from doing that?" "You joined the Night's Watch. You were on the wall when it happened. Your oath to take the Black took precedence." He stood there, feeling stunned. Well, perhaps it would be fair to say even more stunned than before. "I was on the wall. From what I heard, you were doing well. We didn't get much news, but from what we heard. Well, you saved the Lord Commander's life when he was attacked by a white." He shivered a little. The very thought of whites even now made him uneasy. I don't know what to say. I should have been with you. I'm sorry. I should have..." "Don't talk, Rod." Robb broke in. "You were defending the North on the wall, and if you had been with me then, it would have meant that we would both have died at the Twins." A silence fell as he winced and absorbed this. "Did you die in battle?" "No, I was betrayed." "By who?" "People who had been influenced by Tywin Lannister." "Which people? Who were they?" The phrase, "but it was Roose Bolton who wielded the knife." He went very cold and still. "The same man who is inside our walls?" "Yes," Father said heavily, "and you cannot kill a man for something he has not done yet. We need the Boltons. We need every house in the North." But he killed Robb. In a future that has not happened, in a future where I was not there to advise him about what Roose Bolton can be like. Jon, I know how angry you must be. I was angry too, but we have already changed things. In the future that Robb remembers Domeric Bolton was dead by now, instead of being betrothed to Sansa. This shocked him. Dead? How? Poison, we suspect, and perhaps at the hand of his now dead half-brother, Ramsay Snow. Jon breathed. He rubbed his forehead. He had a lot to think about. This. I know that it's a great deal to take in, said Father. But you needed to know. The only others who know so far are Lady Stark, Luwin, and Theon Greyjoy. And that hurt. Theon? Why does he know? Because he was touched by the old gods too, and because in the world that will not happen, the Ironborn attacked the North. Theon did not understand the power that his own father had over him. Theon tried to face both ways, but was forced into obedience by his father. He took Winterfell, but then became a prisoner of the Boltons, who cut bits off him. More shock, and then fury and nausea combined. He took Winterfell, and was part flayed for his crimes by the Boltons, Robb said with a wince. Brother, you cannot be angry with Theon. He is already a different man. He sighed. God, so much to think about. Aye, Father said quietly. And now it's your turn. Robb, there is something that you do not know about Jon, who his mother was for a start. Robb eyed Father. I did wonder, not that it matters. Jon's my brother. Father's nostrils flared for a moment. No, he's your cousin. Robb stared at him. What? He's your cousin. His mother is buried here in Winterfell. She was your Aunt Lyanna. I am not his father. This seemed to utterly stun Robb, who gaped at first, Father, and then Jon, and then back to Father. But I don't understand. Why would you have people think that he was your son? And then his eyes widened. You brought Aunt Lyanna's bones back from Dorne, where the remains of the King's Guard had been guarding her. And you brought Jon back then. Then his father was Rhaegar Targaryen. Yes, Father said curtly, and that was a secret known only to your mother and I. I told Jon a few weeks back. Now you know it too. You must keep it secret, because if the king discovers that a child of Rhaegar Targaryen lives, then that child is in mortal danger. Robb pulled a face. But the king loved Aunt Lyanna. Would he really kill her child? You did not see him after he was presented with the bodies of Jon's half-siblings in King's Landing. He laughed. I could not take the chance. I told everyone that he was of my blood. I did not lie. But it was not the whole truth. From the way that Robb frowned, Jon could tell that a number of pieces were falling into place. So that's why Mother's been warmer to you of late. Hey, Jon looked at the floor. I hope that you do not feel any less of me now that you know the truth, he said in a voice that wobbled a bit more than he wanted it to. I want nothing more than to... He never finished the sentence, because all of a sudden, Robb had him in a bear hug that would have impressed the great Jon. Don't be a bloody fool, Robb muttered in his ear. You are my brother. You have always been my brother. You will always be my brother. You're a Stark. You'll always be a Stark. You're part of the pack. Winter's coming, and I can't think of a better person to have by my side than my brother. Jon closed his eyes and smiled as he felt that hug. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the smile on the face of Father to one side. And then he knew that what he had feared, an estrangement from Robb, because of the truth about his heritage, would not come to pass. And just for a moment, he wanted to cry. After a long moment, Robb broke the bear hug and then slapped Jon on the shoulders with both hands. Right then. Some ale? Not a bad idea. Some ale. Bronn, this lord business could be very odd at times, he thought as he sat on the rock and cast the hook of his fishing rod carefully into the river. He'd found this place on his third day of being Lord Foxhold. The river held trout. His river. His trout. He pulled gently on the line, let it out again, and then peered up at the sun. Oh yes, a lovely day, and some fishing. It didn't get better than this. Of course some people didn't like the fact that he was Lord Foxhold. The names confused him at times. Bronn Castley, Lord Foxhold. Mind you, the last man to hold the title had been called Collish. He shrugged internally. One of his neighbors was one Lord Durkin, a younger man with a large nose and next to no chin. Oh, and a raging snob. He'd been horrified by the fact that the new Lord Foxhold was not nobly born and had curtailed his one visit quite sharply. On the other hand, his other neighbor, Lord Flinters, seemed to approve of him. The older man had left a few hours before and had been a fount of good advice. All nobles were small folk, originally, he'd muttered to him in his solar over a cup of wine each. And anyone who says different is an idiot. There are lords alive now whose grandparents or great-grandparents were sellswords or merchants or whatever. Look at the Riverlands. The Tullys were originally lesser lords before Aegon arrived, whilst in the Reach the Tyrells were stewards to the Gardener Kings. No, lords come and go. It's what you do that counts. Old Geordie Collish was a good man, but his wife was never able to give him children. He loved her dearly, and now the Collish line is gone. Bronn had sipped his own wine. Not entirely gone, he had replied, shrewdly, causing the older man to peer at him quizzically. I saw the likeness of my predecessor on his tomb. Bother a rather striking likeness to my steward, Ursula Stone. Lord Flinters had grunted with approval. You noticed that, did you? It was the one time that he strayed. He was a good man, as I said. He regretted hurting his wife, she found out. He was terrible at keeping a secret. But he loved his bastard daughter, kept her close, and taught her well, but he could never bring himself to get her legitimized. A shame. I think he wanted to, in his last days, but by then, it was too late. A shadow flitted to one side in the water, and he gently pulled the lure to one side slightly. He had to admit that Ursula Stone was a fine steward. She knew the foxhold backwards and forwards, and she knew the land like the back of her hand. The only problem was that she seemed to loathe his very existence. Which was fair enough. If he'd been in her place, then he would have loathed him as well. It just made life a bit, well, awkward. He sighed. That wasn't the only thing that was awkward. This news about Lord Aaron's wounding and the disappearance of his wife, well, it made him uneasy. He tilted his head to one side. All of a sudden, he could hear horses off to one side. Fast horses being driven hard and in a team. He looked to one side. Yes, there was dust being kicked up by something on the road that was just on the other side of those trees. He looked back at his lord. It was nothing to do with him. But when the carriage emerged, being pulled by a lathered team of horses, he did look over. The three men at the front and on top of the carriage were looking about wildly, and when one of them saw him, he waved furiously. Ho there! He sighed and looked at them. Can I help you? Where are we? Don't you know? We were in a hurry and got turned around. We are to the north of Salt Pans. Are we not? Aye, this is Foxhold. The man looked at his companions with what seemed to be confusion. Foxhold, he called back at Bronn. Is there a master here? Aye, there is, Bronn shouted back as he reluctantly reeled in his lure and then stood up. What's amiss? We have a sick woman here, the first man replied. She needs a maester. Is there a ford nearby or a bridge? He peered down the line of the river. There's a bridge to the Foxhold about a mile, that way. Of course you'll need Lord Foxhold's permission to get into it. The Foxhold, that is. The two men stared at him, and then at each other. And where is he? Here, I am Lord Foxhold. The men peered at him, then at each other, and then back at him. Well, he was wearing an old pair of breeches, scuffed boots, and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his usual fishing attire. But he didn't look that bad, did he? You're Lord Foxhold? I am. But whatever the man had been about to say was lost as someone within the carriage screamed something. Whatever it was totally incoherent and made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. What was going on? I think whoever that is does need a master. Swing along the river and you'll soon see the bridge. He peered at the rise behind him, and the tree where the road he'd taken from the stables was tethered with a feed bag over its nose. I'll meet you there. Something was niggling at him, some feeling that something was very wrong here. A man on a horse could always beat a team, pulling a carriage, especially as he could ride across the bend in the river when they had to follow the curve. By the time they reached the bridge, his curiosity had been well and truly piqued by the livery that the men were wearing. They looked like Velleman and from House Aaron. And the last news from King's Landing had all been of woe for that house, with the hand of the king injured and his wife missing. So who were these people, and who was the woman? As they rode to the Foxhold, he looked at the sweating man who was urging the tired horses on. So, who is this lady? The man looked at him almost fearfully. Lady Barnley, on her way to, the north, to see her son. Bronn did not stare at the man, nor did he sigh and shake his head. Whoever he was, he had no idea how to lie. Oh, aye, he said instead. Lady Barnley, fair enough. And then he caught a whiff of something. It was coming from the closed carriage, and it hinted at corruption. Just a whiff, but he had smelt it before. Whoever was in the carriage was injured, badly enough that a wound was tainted. It explained the earlier incoherent scream. He nudged his horse on ahead, and as they approached the gates of the foxhold, he waved at the guards. "Get the master, get Haster." Yes, it was still an unfortunate name, but he had to admit that the young man knew his bloody business. If there was one thing that made him realize how well organized the foxhold was as a result of his bloody-minded steward's work, it was the way that his people, and yes, it was still taking him almost by surprise when he realized that they were his people, reacted with such speed and care. As the carriage came to a stop, then ostlers and grooms came out to care to the exhausted horses, whilst others locked the wheels. He could see Haster hurrying down the steps from his chambers, whilst Ursula Stone, her face as flinty as ever, was also approaching. One of the men on the carriage jumped down and went to the door. Looking at Bronn out of the corner of his eye for a long moment, he finally opened it. Inside, Bronn could see two figures, both women. One was large and slumped across the seat, whilst the other was holding what looked like a wet cloth to her forehead. The second looked up at the door as it opened, and Bronn could see at a glance that she was desperately worried. He was worried too. The smell was stronger in here. "Lady Barnley, I presume?" Bronn asked, and was rewarded by a confused look from the woman with the wet cloth. And then Haster was next to him. At the sight of the Meister, the woman started to babble about how her ladyship had been injured and had a corrupted wound in her arm, and how they had tried to treat it. Haster did not seem to be listening. Instead, he was inspecting the comatose woman with an air of deepening concern. "My lord," Haster said, eventually, "we need to get her indoors at once. I need a litter for the lady. A clean table, sheets on it, my instruments and—" He sniffed the air and turned. "If anything, even paler. A brazier." Bronn nodded and then relayed the orders back to Ursula Stone, who was now at his side. As people started to run about and a small party ran up with a litter. As the woman was transferred to it, she stirred feverishly, and then she seemed to awaken for a moment. She looked straight at Bronn and a single, oddly hopeful word dribbled from her lips. "Peace," and then she was unconscious again. As they disappeared into the main keep with her, Bronn followed, thinking furiously, before pulling his steward to one side by the door. Ursula Stone looked molish at the interruption, but also curious. "I want guards keeping an eye on them, at all times," he said, in a low voice. "They say that she's Lady Barnley, but if that's her real name, then I'll eat my own foot. They're lying, and I think I know why. They're Valeman. House Aaron, I suspect." She froze at this, but then seemed to think about it very hard indeed, before stealing an eye at the carriage. Indeed. If what I suspect is true, then we'll need to send a raven to King's Landing to say that we've found the missing Lady Lysa Arryn." At this point, Haster ran out, obviously looking for them both. "My lord—" "Quietly, Haster. Quietly." "What news?" "It's bad, my lord. She has a corrupted wound in her arm, and it's bad. There are red lines up her arm." Bronn winced. "Can you save her arm?" "I will do my best, but I suspect not. It may be that even if the arm comes off, I may not be able to save her, my lord. I will know more soon. But also, her name is Lady Arryn." "I know. Do your best, Maester. We will send a raven, but try and keep her alive." Gendry? It was his first time on a ship, and so far he wasn't enjoying it much. In fact, he wasn't enjoying anything much these days. A month ago, he'd been apprenticed to Master Mott, and he knew what his future held. An anvil, maybe a wife someday. And then the hand of the king had appeared, with Lord Stannis bloody Baratheon, and everything had changed. He'd always wondered who his deputy was. Well, now he knew. The king. His Grace, the fucking king. The moment he found out, he damn near shit himself. And now he was here, on this ship, in a new set of clothes, with a bag of gold coins and a warhammer. The clothes had been given to him by the man who had sent him to the ship, Sir Davos Seaworth, a man that he had heard good things about, and the gold and the warhammer, well, the king had given him those. He'd arrived at dawn, the day that he'd sailed, looking slightly haunted, and had inspected a bleary-eyed Gendry carefully. "Gods," the king had said, "the more I look at you, the more I see my father, and the more I wonder which god cursed me with, Joffrey." And then he'd given him the gold and the warhammer. "Thought about this a lot," the king had said quietly. "Not much use giving you a sword if you can't use it. And the fact that you're my bastard son means that you might have to defend yourself, so take one of my hammers. You're used to them, and it shouldn't take you long to train yourself, so to speak. I've sent word to have you trained." He'd stared at the warhammer, seen the quality of it, and made a noise of protest. only to get a wave of the hand from the king. Bah, I've got a dozen of the things left from when I was growing up. I had that one when I was your age, before getting a heavier one. It'll do for you. It's not much. I wish I could do more, and perhaps I can one day. But I'm going to war, and I haven't much time. I sail for the north in 3 days. Be well, lad, and don't trust anyone who says he's a Lannister. They'll have no love for you. And then he had gone. So now here he was on this damn ship, discovering the joys of seasickness, much to the disgust of the captain, a crusty old Stormlander called Hedrick, especially after throwing up on the man's boots. The ship swooped downwards into another trough in the water, and he swallowed and tried to stop another dry heave. Wonder of wonders, he succeeded, mostly because there was nothing left in him to bring up. At first he'd asked if they'd sailed into a dreadful storm, only to be told it was a bit choppy today, which has made him wonder what a real storm was like. That had been 2 days before. He now knew exactly what a storm was like. He also knew what it was like to be so miserable that you wished you were dead. The ship dipped sickeningly again, and then rolled, and he stared at the wall ahead and held his breath for a moment. Yes, that worked, and he tried desperately to think of something, anything, other than his stomach. It was then that someone pounded on the door, before opening it. A small man in drenched oilskins stood there, panting. "Captain needs to see you. He's at wheel," he said in a strong Stormlands accent as he threw another set of oilskins at him. "Needs to see you now." Gendry stared at the man. "But there's a storm out." "Hork." "There," the other man scowled. "And there'll be a bloody storm in here if you don't go to him." He went. It wasn't easy. The ship was pitching and rolling, and he knew that he didn't have sea legs. Twice he almost fell, and that was before he got onto deck, and when he did get there, it was bedlam. The wind was howling and the deck was wet from the waves that surged by. The cable things that held the masts up were thrumming as the wind vibrated them, and the sky, black clouds roiled by, bringing with them something that was more than drizzle, but less than steady rain. Even with the oilskins, he was soaked by the time he got to the wheel. The captain was standing next to it by 2 men who were wrestling with the wheel itself, and all 3 were looking at the mainmast worriedly. As he approached the captain, he could see that he was holding a piece of metal. "You're a blacksmith, aren't you?" the captain bellowed at him as he got close. "Aye," he bellowed back. "Take a look at this." And the piece of metal was thrust at him. He stared at it, and then at the captain, and then back at the metal. It looked like a bracket or some kind of fitting. "What?" "Look at it. You know metal, don't you?" "Why? Is it any good?" He stared at it and then brought it close to his face. Then he braced himself against the nearest bit of wood, pulled out a knife, and then scraped at it, just in front of his eyes. "No," he finally bellowed. "It's bad. Poorly cast, quenched wrongly, and brittle." The captain stared back at the mast and then let loose a string of fascinating swear words and curses that went on for some time without somehow repeating himself. He finally finished with a curse on all shitty Dornish fucking Chandlers. "It fell off one of the masts earlier," he shouted at Gendry. "I had new ironworks fitted a month ago in Dorne. If I ever see that smooth-talking bastard again, I'll gut him with the bluntest spoon I have." Gendry thought about that and then winced. It was at this point that he made the connection. Wait, how many fittings are like this one? Too many for me to feel happy about being at sea in a storm. Especially a storm like this one. And the captain never finished whatever he had been about to say, because all of a sudden there was a horrible creaking noise, like a giant post being bent by a pair of giant hands, and then all of a sudden the tallest mast on the ship was topping to one side, breaking cables as it fell, and bringing the sail that had been on it down as it fell. The whole mast fell with a rumble, and Gendry heard muffled screams from the men who were caught up in it. Another cable parted as it failed under the stress, with the free end smashing into a man, and in an instant he was gone, his pale, surprised face arcing backwards as he was knocked into the sea. "Axes!" Captain Hedrick bellowed desperately. "Axes! Cut the remaining cables! Get it free before the mast acts as an anchor and we broach! Axes!" Total chaos everywhere followed. The captain ran forwards. Other men appeared, struggling desperately with the wreckage. Gendry stared at it all, and then he too ran towards the wreckage. A man appeared from nowhere, a thin stringy slip of a man, and he flailed at a nearby cable with the axe he was carrying, with no real effect. "Here!" Someone threw an axe at Gendry, and he caught it without thinking about it before stepping up to the cable. He hefted it in 2 hands, brought it up and chopped down with all his might. The axe jarred in his hands at the impact, but half the ropes in the cable had parted at his blow, and the next one did the job, the ends flying apart. "Stand clear!" Gendry bellowed as he stepped up to the next cable, that disappearing face in his mind, and then he chopped again with everything he had. This one was thinner and took just 1 blow to part it, but the one after that was a monster. 1 blow hardly shook it, and he gritted his teeth, wiped the rain from his eyes, and then chopped again and again. The cable groaned as it weakened and he paled a little. "Stand clear of this one when it goes." Gendry shouted and was rewarded by cries of acknowledgement to either side. It was good that they did, because his next blow severed it and the ends whipped out cruelly at a shocking speed. On to the next one, and the next, and then the final one in front of him. As the last one parted, then the mass of rope and timber shifted a little, and then it was gone, pulled over the side. Someone screamed as it went. But Gendry could see that one of the trapped men had been freed and was being pulled away by a shipmate. The ship staggered as the weight went, and then he heard the captain shouting orders at the top of his lungs. Something about bending on another sail once the spare spar was jury-rigged, about steering due east, and about getting another hand on the wheel. After a moment he realized that the last thing meant him. "You've got some muscles on you, lad," replaced Dirk on the wheel, the shorter one. "Relax, you're not there to steer the ship. You're there to hold the ship to whatever course Harnley, the other one, sets." He nodded, did as he was told, and was astonished at the force it took to keep the wheel steady. The hour that followed was torture, a constant battle to keep the jerking wheel steady as the wind howled around him and sheets of rain hurtled down. Various crew members ran around like madmen, pulling on ropes, and as he watched, a very short new mast was raised and lashed to the stump of the new one. As the new sail was raised and sheeted into place, he felt a hand on his shoulder. The captain, with another 2 men next to him, who relieved them both, he let go of the wheel with a barely suppressed groan of relief, and then staggered back down to his cabin, where he pulled the sodden oilskins off. He was looking at the rest of his dripping clothing with distaste, at which point the door was banged on again. "Come." The captain entered quickly and peered at him. "Well done today, lad," he said tiredly. "If you hadn't cut those cables when you did, well, we might have broached, and that would have been the end of us. But with a mast gone, we have to seek port. We're headed for Dragonstone. I just thought you should know. Try and eat something. We're not out of this yet. I lost 5 men today, with 10 more wounded. That makes me light on crew. Get some rest. You'll be working out a part of your passage." Ned, preparing to ride to the Wall was no easy thing. When you were the Warden of the North, Ned leant back in his chair and then looked at the map in his solar. Before looking wryly at the stack of letters and messages that had to be read, evaluated, and then replied to, there was a lot that had to be arranged first. Cat was obviously staying in Winterfell to advise Bran as the Stark in Winterfell. Besides, there was no way that he was going to risk a pregnant woman on the road to Castle Black. Robb was going with him, as he had planned. It was time that the lads saw the Wall, especially as they both now knew how important it was for the North now. The lives of everyone in the North, perhaps everyone in Westeros, now rested on the Wall. He sighed and then looked at the list of things that Cat would have to help Bran with. And then he winced a little. Bran had been left in charge of Winterfell in that terrible future that would not now come to pass. From what Robb had heard, Bran had died here, crippled and betrayed. Well, Theon wouldn't do that this time. He was a changed man. He was still in 2 minds about taking Theon to the Wall. It would help to have the Ironborn alerted, but would Balon Greyjoy listen, even to his own son? He stood up and walked over to the door, which was open. As he strode through it, he could see young Jushin Reed approaching, and he frowned a little. "Jushin, were you looking for me?" "Yes, Lord Stark," the boy said, almost formally. "May I talk with you in private?" "You may," he sighed, and led him to his solar, closing the door behind him, and then gesturing at a chair. "Now," he said, as he sat down himself. "What's all this about?" "Dreams, Lord Stark." He paused at this. Jason hadn't reported any new dreams since arriving in Winterfell with his father and sister. "You're dreaming again? Special dreams?" The lad nodded somberly. He seemed to do everything somberly these days, as if he held not an ounce of frivolity. "Aye, Lord Stark." He seemed to collect his thoughts for a moment, and then he spoke again. "I dreamt of 100 cages filled with parts of men that still moved. I dreamt of a great mountain of ice, filled with a terrible hate and being summoned by a terrible evil. I dreamt of a walking dead man who was filled with light, but who needed help with one last task. And I dreamt of a shooting star from the south, whose heart was from the north. Ned absorbed all of this and then nodded slowly. Did you see any faces in your dreams? Some. The man who was dead but was filled with light. He looked like some of the statues that are in the crypts here. That was a surprise. A Stark? He considered this for a moment. Not every Stark is buried here, despite the efforts of those who saw them fall in battle. But this filled with light business. A walking dead man. A wipe, but not turned all the way. Why? How? I know not, Lord Stark. Ned nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me about this. I will think on it a lot. I was going to pass word for you anyway. You know that your father is going to Castle Black with me? I, Lord Stark. My son Bran will be the Stark in Winterfell when we are gone. If you see any other visions, you are to tell him at once. Him and my wife. 2 other things. When you first came here to Winterfell and you saw my dire wolf, you started to say a name. Did you already know what I'll name her? There was a pause, and then the lad nodded reluctantly. Aye, my lord. I have been thinking about a name for her a lot of late. I was thinking Frostfire. For a moment, a look of smiling relief flashed over Josian's face. Then it faded. A good name for her, my lord. He smiled at the lad. Then he sighed. As for the other, can I ask you a question, Johnson Reed? Of course, Lord Stark. You said that you could once see the moment of your death, the manner of it. The boy paled. Aye. May I ask how you died before? Josiah looked down, still very pale, and then he looked Ned in the eye. I was killed by whites, Lord Stark, under a great weirwood tree, beyond the wall. I was trying to protect your son Bran, who could no longer walk after losing the use of his legs in a fall. Bran was our last hope. He was the replacement for the three-eyed crow, Brandon Rivers, who still lives there now, entwined in the tree itself. Ned felt himself stiffen from head to toe with shock. Wait, what? How could Bran be north of the wall? I thought that he died in Winterfell in that other future. But Josian was shaking his head. The crypt. I remember dreaming once of hiding there, with my sister, and Bran, and Rickon too, who was with some girl I have not seen here. The sea had come to Winterfell, but we hid and took a tunnel out of it. That's all I remember. But the tree, where I died, I remember that well, until it changed. Something happened. You speak of another future. Yes, there was one once. That's why my dreams have changed of late. The old gods did something. If this was true, that meant that Theon hadn't murdered Bran and Rickon. So what had really happened? The fact that Bran had been crippled in both the vision and the future that Robb remembered meant that it all sounded true, or at least that one followed the other. No, he forced his mind away from that terrible vision, looked at Rosianne in the eye and then nodded, before placing a hand on his shoulder. Yes, the old gods touched my son, Josian. You cannot tell anyone about this? Few would understand. Josian Reed stared at him gravely, but then nodded again. I know, my lord, he said hoarsely, as he stood up. I know. May I go by your leave? Aye, Ned said quietly. You can go. As the boy slipped out, Ned thought long and hard about what he had just heard. Certain pieces were falling into place. In that first vision, the one that he had had in the Godswood all those weeks ago, he remembered hearing a voice. The voice of an old man talking bitterly about why things had changed. Just as he had his replacement. Had that been this three-eyed crow, and he remembered his father talking about the tales surrounding Brynden Rivers. Was that not Lord Bloodraven, an odd man, a Targaryen bastard, who had lost an eye in battle, and who had once been Hand of the King, before becoming Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but then vanished one day beyond the wall almost 50 years ago? Where had he gone to? What had he done? What role did this three-eyed crow play in all of this? His eyes narrowed a little. Wait, father had once said that there had been a rumor that Brynden Rivers had been a sorcerer or something. He'd used magic anyway. And why, if he still lived then, he was far, far older than any man could be. Entwined in the tree as well. What did that mean? Magic. It all came down to magic, and he just didn't know enough about it. So much depended on it, but so little was known. Well, here at least, his ancestors must have known, How else could Bran the Builder have built all that he had? The Wall, Winterfell, and the other places that he was at least linked to. Storm's End, the High Tower, and Old Town. All amazing feats. And now, here he was, desperately trying to piece together fragments, scraps of information left by his ancestors. He hoped that it would be enough. What if it wasn't, though? He closed his eyes and sighed. If he started to second-guess himself, then he'd run the risk of going raving mad. No, he couldn't afford to do that. He stood up and left his solar. Perhaps a walk to the Godswood to clear his head. As he passed down the corridor, he looked out of one of the windows. Off to one side, he could see Demeric Bolton giving young Robert another riding lesson. The boy was a fast learner, according to Demeric, and judging by the way that he was sitting in the saddle, he was improving by the day. As he padded down the stairs to the main courtyard, he saw Frostfire sitting to one side, watching as Grey Wind and Ghost play-fought as their master sparred with practiced swords. He walked over to her, and as he approached, she turned and looked at him, her eyes intent. "I named you today," he muttered to her, and he reached out and slowly laid a hand on her neck. "Frostfire, what do you think?" The direwolf tilted her head to one side and then huffed once, as if in acknowledgement. He wondered what direwolves thought about names and naming conventions. What did they call themselves? He sighed again. A horn sounded beyond the walls of Winterfell, and he frowned at the gates. Men were peering out at the road before shouting something down, and after a while, Jari Castle strode up to him, looking a little bemused. "A party approaches, my lord," one bears. Well, the Baratheon banner, with colors reversed. His eyebrows flew up for a moment. Oh, Robert had obviously been busy. A bold choice, that. Admit them at once. He watched as the little party of no more than a dozen men entered, balked a little at the sight of the direwolf, and then came forwards. Some bore Baratheon livery, whilst their leader, a totally bald man, bore a tabard of brown with white feathers or quills. He blinked. "Courtney Penrose, I haven't seen your face since Pike." "Aye, my lord. We shared that barrel of ale together after the end of the siege, along with the others." He dismounted and then bowed formally, before gesturing to a smaller figure on the next horse, who was wearing a hooded cloak. "Lord Eddard Stark, I have the honor to present to you my ward, Edric Storm." The boy pulled his hood down, and then nodded formally in his saddle at Ned. "I am honored to meet you, Lord Stark. My father told me many stories about you in our passage from Storm's End to Dragonstone." Then he grinned in such a way that made him look very like his father. "He did not say that you had a direwolf." Ned smiled a little. All of a sudden, he had such memories flowing through his head. "Welcome to Winterfell. Sir Courtney, Edric, word of your passing was sent from White Harbor by Lord Manderley. You have made good time. Now, let us get you settled in. There is much we need to discuss." Brynden. Some would probably call the Isle of Faces a very restful place, he thought as he sat grumpily on the bench and stared at the white trees on the other side of the clearing. He wouldn't. He had far too much to think about, starting with, well, the entire damn place. He'd heard the legends and stories about this place. He knew that Adam Valerion had come here, on his dragon, to consult with the Green Men. No one had ever known what he had asked, or been told. As Valerion had been killed, not too long afterwards, had other kings come here. If they had, then history was silent on the matter. Brienne of Tarth sat on the other side of the bench. Her eyes were closed, and she seemed to be savoring the sun on her face. He wondered about what had brought her here. Did she feel that other pull now? That pull, that drive to be on the road to Winterfell? If only they knew what was going on. They hadn't been told much, just to wait, whilst the Green Men, who interestingly enough included women, went about their increasingly busy business, and they were very busy indeed. Many of the older ones seemed to be busy teaching the younger ones about, well, trees, lots and lots of trees, and how to plant them, tender to them, and then leave them to their own devices. He had his own suspicions about what they were planning. That said, he didn't like waiting. Not with lunatics like the Faith Militant, or the seemingly reborn elements of it out there. He hoped that Robert Glavit was well, he and his people. The last thing he wanted to go back and then wade through the blood of hundreds of demented small folk in the name of vengeance. "You're brooding again." Brienne of Tarth had a nasty habit of speaking the truth, very bluntly. He sighed a little. "Yes, we still don't know why we're here, and what's going on, and I feel a different pull now. To Winterfell. Yes, and it was a strong one. I feel it too, he nodded. I wish I could do something to protect that village as well. You saw the eyes on that mad septon. I did. Another pause. Just as he was about to speak again, he heard Boots scuff to one side and looked to his right to see one of the younger green men approach, his hood up with the antlers sticking out to each side. You are both summoned to the Green Man. They both stood, but Brynden frowned as he came upright. The Green Man? I thought that you were all green men. A slight smile played around the lips of the other man. He leads us, so to speak. He sees further than any of us that are south of the wall. That was oddly phrased. And north of the wall? That is something for later. Follow me, please. And off he strode, almost loping away like a man who is used to long walks measured with long strides. Brynden looked at Brienne, shrugged, and then followed. The Green Man led them into one of the few areas that he had only briefly seen before, one of the older parts of the encampment. The buildings were more ancient here. The wood had moss on it in places, the paths seemed more sunken, the stone more weathered, and at the far end was a stone building that seemed older and more ancient than anything he had ever seen. The Green Man led them to it, knocked 3 times on the closed door, and then opened it and escorted them in. There was a hall in the building, with a fireplace that had a huge stone for a hearth and an even bigger one for the back of the hearth. There might have been the remains of something carved on it, but it was hard to tell because of the fire. And in front of the fire there was an old man, a very old man, with what showed of his face being deeply wrinkled. He was hunched, which hid the fact that he had once been very tall, and he was wearing a cloak of the deepest green that he had ever seen. His hood was pulled down to almost the lines of his eyes, and the antlers that were attached to it looked ancient. As they approached, the man caught sight of them and pulled his hands back from where he had been warming them in front of the fire. But not before Brynden caught sight of what looked like terrible burns on one of them. Sir Brynden Tully and Brienne of Tarth. Old as the man must have been, there was still strength in that voice. Brynden frowned slightly. That voice seemed vaguely familiar. I apologize for not meeting you earlier, but I was called away to speak with, well, we'll get to that later. Some friends, shall we say. You must have many questions. We have, Brynden rumbled, still fighting that sense that had met this man once, many years ago, or at least seen him. As we were both called here, we'd like to know why. A small smile flashed across the old man's face. Ah, he said after a long moment. I could tell you, but you wouldn't believe me. I know that you have both heard the call, and that, therefore, you have the blood of the first men within you in some measure. As to why you are here on the Isle of Faces, well, that's for you to discover. And no, Sir Brynden, I am not speaking in riddles. I am saying that you will find out today. An old and rather gnarled hand pointed to the north. There's a heart tree about a mile that way in the forest. There's a path that will lead you straight to it, this time at least. The tree itself is quite large. You'll find a mortar and pestle by the face carving, divide the contents in half, and then eat it. Return here afterwards. Brynden stared at the old man, and then at Brienne, and then back at the old man, as he opened his mouth to ask what he was talking about. The old hand waved them away. Shoo, he went. No, they went, she looking, as baffled as he felt. The younger green man led them out of the building and to a small path that seemed to twist and turn as he looked at it. Taking a deep breath, he led the way. The path did indeed twist and turn, but at least there were no paths that led off it. Just this small, thin trail. He peered at the ground as they went and frowned a little. What had created it? He couldn't see any hoofprints or footprints. Well, there was one footprint, but the number of toes looked wrong. After about a mile, the path widened a little, and he beheld something that made him pause long enough to have Brienne almost walk into him. Then she saw the same thing that he did. The tree. The huge weirwood tree. It looked impossibly old, but also massively strong. That tree is so big that we should have seen it from outside the island, Brienne muttered in shock. Why didn't we? Magic. No one said it out loud. Not that he could sense it, but the word still pealed in his mind like a bell. Well, he said, deeply shaken. Let's be about this. He saw the mortar and pestle as they approached the face. Whoever had carved the face so many years ago had chosen a rather lopsided expression, as if between a smile and a frown. As they halted by it, he reached out and picked up the container with a frown. It looked very old of itself, as if it had been carved many centuries ago, and by odd hands, Peering inside, he could see that weirwood seeds had been ground into a paste, and the words of Robb came to mind. "Eat the paste," he said. Brienne of Tarth stared at him and then also looked into the bowl. "Your friend on the mainland said to eat the paste." "Aye." "Looks revolting." "Yeah." "Will you divide it up?" "Aye." As he did, he wondered just what this would do. How could crushed seeds give anyone a reason for what they were doing here? He sighed, scooped out Brienne of Tarth's portion into her hand, removed his own portion, exchanged an uneasy glance with her, and then ate what was on his hand. It didn't taste too revolting, but it wasn't something that he'd recommend. Darkness fell, and he fell with it. How long he fell for, he could never work out. A heartbeat, a moment, a minute, an hour, a day. All he knew was that he fell, and as he did, he heard scraps of voices. "Riverrun for Riverrun, the king in the north, treachery, woe to the phrase. This is my home, Kingslayer, and I will defend it. Honor, the honor of a Lannister. Your honor is worthless, boy. Blackfish, the blackfish for the Riverlands, the true Tully." When he finally stopped falling, well, he seemed to slow and be suspended in thin air for a moment, and then he saw stone flagstones appear under his feet. He could see statues ahead, and amongst them a figure. Wait, that was Ned Stark. He was talking to an old man, but Brynden was too far away to hear them. He tried to step closer, but his feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. He could not move them. He looked down at them in confusion, and then up again. Ned seemed to be agitated about something, and then shocked, and then the old man he was talking to disappeared, like fog on a hot day. He stared, and then his skin crawled as he realized that all of the statues had somehow opened their eyes filled with green fire. Darkness fell again, and again he fell, but this time for a shorter time. When he opened his eyes again, he looked around, baffled. Where was he? It was night, and there was water nearby, based on the sound of the waves breaking gently nearby. Then he paused. There was a strange glow on the horizon. Oh, and a fire to one side. A man was sitting by it, a man in the robes of the green men. Brynden walked carefully up to the fire. He felt no heat from it, and then man seemed to see straight through him. Was this the Isle of Faces? Then he heard the sound of rowing, and he turned just in time to see a small boat be run up on the shore. Not too far away. 2 men sat in it, whilst a third dressed in leather armor jumped out and walked to the fire. As he approached, Brynden frowned a little. The man had the hair of a Tully, but he had never seen him before. He also looked tired, the kind of tiredness that only a lot of sleep can cure, and also dirty. "You came then," the man by the fire said softly. "I began to fear that you would not." "I came, I had to." The other man sat down heavily on a log to one side. "Do you have any wine?" "I need wine." The green man reached down, pulled out a wineskin from a bag, and threw it over to the other, who caught it, unstoppered it, and then took a long swallow before lowering it. "I didn't know that stone could melt," he muttered. "Or men. Come to that. Now you know better. Was it worth it?" There was a pause as the dirty man stared into the fire. Was it worth it? Well, he's dead. Him and his sons. And his fucking castle still burns. He beggared the Riverlands to build it, and his own precious Iron Islands, all for nothing. Brynden felt his skin crawl again, and then he stared back at that glow in the sky. Harrenhal? Was that Harrenhal? If this was the day that it was burnt by Balerion, then this had to be his ancestor, Edmund Tully. He shivered for a moment. "Did the Valyrian give you the title I mentioned?" Another pause. "He did," he said eventually. "He'll proclaim it tomorrow, Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. Ambitious bastard, isn't he? But we are well rid of Harren and his iron-born scum." He looked at the green man bleakly. "So, this will be, as you predicted, my last trip here. There will be those who will say that I should not have come here at all. What do I need to know?" "There are 3 things," the green man said slowly as he looked into the fire. "All are important, and they are all related to the Valyrian. Or perhaps we should just call him the Targaryen, as Valyria is no more, gone in smoke and flame. Don't get lyrical on me now, Uncle." 3 things. "Uncle," Brynden peered at the green man. "Tullys had once been green men. 3 things. The first is the steel." He lies. "He may say that the secret will be rediscovered, but it died in Valyria, at the Doom. Valyrian steel can no longer be made. Shit, I was promised a sword. You'll not get it. Second, the Targaryens were just lesser dragon lords, not greater ones. As time goes on and proud idiots fail to pass on everything to their sons, well, dragon lore will fade. Best keep that one to yourself. Bury it deep and whisper it to your sons. Edwin Tully stared at his uncle. I thought that the dragons were here to usher in a new age. For a time, it's a pity. They're needed. There will come a time when, and for a second the eyes of the green man darted to Brendan, which shocked him deeply. When fish are black here on this isle, they will be needed again. His ancestor took another long pull on the wineskin. Uncle, that makes no sense. Worry not, just be aware that the dragons will not always last. Very well. And the third thing, something else was lost at the Doom. Knowledge of a different kind. The Veolians liked to wed brother to sister. Do that here in Westeros, and after a generation or two, you have deformed idiots for offspring. The Veolians had an answer to that. He looked away and winced. The Targaryens will see that secret spark and gutter and die. Tullys of the future must not trust them. Edwin Tully stared at the other man. Are you saying that they will go mad? Eventually, I have seen it. Be cautious. And that is the third thing. Uncle, you are saying that I have bent the knee to a man whose family will eventually go mad. He will unite Westeros. That is needed. The visions from the old gods are clear on that. The Starks will bend the knee. They are too canny to do otherwise. Don't worry about the Storm Kings. One will be reborn after a fashion. Something is coming, Edwin. Something far ahead of us. We green men will prepare. Protect this isle as you agreed. A long silence fell as the two men stared at each other, and then Edwin Tully nodded slowly. Very well, it is agreed. You have given me much to think on, and you said that I will never return here. You have a great task ahead of you. Harren the Black looted the Riverlands. You must restore it. You'll be busy. Brendan's ancestor stood and then passed the wineskin back. Will I ever see you again? No, I've seen that much. The green man stood and then embraced his nephew. Your father would be proud of you. River run endures. River run endures. Be well, uncle. And then he was off, striding back to the boat and the waiting men. Brendan watched him go. After a while, he turned back to the green man. Can you see me? The green man stood and pulled his hood up, settling the antlers in place on his head. That's a dangerous question, he said. My nephew couldn't see you, but then he believes in the Seven, not the old gods. Not really. What do you believe in? He stood there for a long moment. I never thought about it. Time you should then, Blackfish. Time you should. You may not be sure about the old gods, but let me tell you something. They believe in you. Why else are you here? And for a moment his eyes blazed with red fire. Brendan felt his eyes widen as he stumbled back, and then he was falling again. This time it was for longer, and then his feet hit the ground again. Flagstones, it felt like, but everything around him was black. Greetings, Blackfish, said a voice that he felt rather than heard. We have watched you for some time. He looked about into the darkness wildly. Who are you? The old gods. There are those who call us that. We are simply those that are. Those that remain. We have long watched. It's time to do more than that now. He shivered. Did you send the call out? Was that your work? Nay, that was done by the Wolf's Blood, the Starks, as you would call them. We gave them the means to do it long ago, after the first long night and the alliance of desperation. And now the call has been sounded again. Men must listen. You must help them to listen. Otherwise, doom will follow. The others, as you call them, come again. The others? They are not a myth then? No, never a myth. A tale the start of which has been shrouded in darkness. The thing behind them is one of madness and hate for the living. A cautionary tale even for gods. But time destroys memory, and long ago something broke free from its prison. Something able to make the dead walk. He shivered again. Truly, the tales of the first men about whites
are true.
All of them. But men are very good at forgetting, and others at refusing to believe. They place their own desires first, and their own hate. The blackness lifted to reveal a hall, the twins in fact, a place that he knew and hated. And the hall was filled with fighting men, Men in Stark and Tully livery were desperately fighting with knives against Freys armed with swords. An ambush? What was happening? He looked around wildly, and then his blood ran cold. Edmure was on the floor, his chest rising and falling, but his forehead covered in blood, and he was there, himself. He had killed one Frey with what looked like a spoon through the eye and was laying about him with a sword before glancing back at Daenerys, snarling and then cutting a way out of the nearest door. He looked at the das as well. Two red-headed bodies were lying in front of it. He froze in horror. Cat. It was Cat, and next to him was that Robb. He looked older and warier even in death, bearded as well. There was a thin, cold-eyed man next to him with a dripping knife, and on the das Walder Frey was cackling with glee. What happened here? Treachery and foolishness, all for naught. They all died anyway. The wolf's bloods are persistent. But that is not why we show you this. This was the moment that we acted. Acted? This is a future that will not now happen. A future that we diverted. We took the mind of Robert Stark from the moment of his death and took it back through time. He stared at the body stunned. The hall faded from view and a room appeared, smaller and with a bed, and then suddenly the figure under the blankets woke with a scream before looking about wildly. It was Robb Stark again, but younger and unbearded. To now, some months back, he remembers what went wrong and has been working with his father. Truths have been shown to him, to them both. They know about the others. They sent out the call. You will need to talk to them. They will need help. Help? With what? With those who will not listen. The first men are awakening, but we still stand on the blade of a sword. Things can still go wrong. The hearts of men are hard to predict at times. Stubbornness and stupidity can still rule at times. And this must be avoided. Blackness fell again, and when it lifted, he realized that he was on the walls of Riverrun. But it was a Riverrun that was different. The air was cold and snowflakes drifted through the air. Men were working on the walls here and there, repairing damage, and there was the smell of smoke in the air. And then he saw the two figures looking out over the ramparts, himself again. Only older and infinitely wearier. He was dressed in leather armor, but had a necklace of small antlers around his neck, with a wicked-looking mace in his belt. And Robert Baratheon was next to him. The king looked older as well, and a lot thinner. Still powerful, but there was a haunted look in his eyes. He stepped up to them to see at what they were looking at, and saw a small boat drifting sluggishly through the water, its way blocked now and then by chunks of ice. There was a body in it, judging by the fire that was engulfing it. A funeral boat. I always wondered why we burnt our dead, the older version of him spat bitterly. Now I know. A holdover from the old days of the first men, the king rumbled. A good thing. Otherwise we'd have whites in your crypts, he sighed. So much for going north. It would be a death sentence. I've lost enough men as it is, and then had to kill those who came back. He patted his sword and Brendan started slightly. What was that thing? It was huge and old, and so very deadly. A rider came, the older him said eventually. News from the west. It's true. All of it. The king sighed. I feared it was so. Damn that bloody man. Laensinas. He spat the word with hate. Fools, the lot of them. Especially Tywin. He wouldn't believe. Tyrion Lannister is no fool, and he believes he has to. He leads the last of them south. What's left of them? The Westerlands are gone. The north is besieged. Winterfell might be holding out, but Ned's last raven said that the Night's King himself was outside the walls. And the Iron Islands are best not talked about. Any word from anywhere else? Nay, and the new maester, well, we'll need new ravens. Who would have thought that your old maester would go so mad? Others will come. Although the ones from the twins, well, we know what happened there. Boots scuffed to one side, and a tired-looking young man walked towards them with a sack in one hand and bowed formally. Your Grace, Lord Sockley. The lad looked familiar, like a younger version of the king, with a shock of black hair and very blue eyes. A bastard son, perhaps. I spotted a white that looked familiar, and he opened the sack and pulled out a severed head, with blue eyes that opened and closed and a mouth that also moved. Brynden stared at it in horror. A white? Wait. The older version of him and the king both peered at the head and then burst into laughter. The late Lord Frey. The other one chuckled and then shook his head. He begged for help in his messages. And now here he is. So much for the phrase. He pointed to one side. Put it down, please, lad. I'll see to this one. The lad did as he was told and was about to move off when the king held up a hand. Gendry. Your grace? The king paused for a long moment. You've done me proud these past few weeks, shown your mettle like few others. Time it was rewarded. I don't know how long we've got here. I don't know if we can break out south and survive, but whatever we do, I want you at my side as my son. You're Gendry Baratheon from this day forwards. I'll proclaim it. The young man bowed his head for a long moment and then looked up with tears shining in his eyes. Thank you, your grace. Father. The king laid a large hand on his shoulder and smiled at him. Off you go, lad, as he went. Then the two of them looked back at the severed head, and then the older version of him pulled out the mace, hefted it thoughtfully, and then brought it down on the head of Walder Frey savagely. And the darkness fell again. This must be avoided. This future holds no hope. You must work against it, you and Brienne of Tarth. Why me? Why her? You are both needed. You are both honorable in ways that many do not understand, but also clear-sighted. You see the fundamental truths that many deny. You both have your blind spots, but between you, you are one. You will need her, and she will need you to keep to the proper path. The world rests on this, Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. You are needed. He thought long and hard. What would this make me? A green man? Something like that. The green men will be tending the groves again. They will have their duties. They will walk the roads and forests again. As it was before, you and Brienne of Tarth will have other duties. You must convince other men, even men as stubborn as your nephew, and the old line of Casterly Rock, who must avoid the fate that overtook him in that future we showed you, that of a stumbling wight in the blood-soaked halls of his ancestors. He nodded slowly. Very well, I will do this. What choice do I have? None. And then pain annihilated his world as red fire enveloped him for a long instant. When he opened his eyes again, he was sprawled at the foot of the tree. Brienne of Tarth was next to him, and as she opened her own eyes and groaned, he saw red fire in them for an instant. Brienne! The darkness smothered her and she clawed at it for a moment, and then it lifted. She was standing at the edge of a forest with statues in front of her. Statues of men and the odd women dressed in archaic clothing. Old armor, furs in places. She looked about, confused. Where was this place? The statues stood on flagstones, and... wait, there were others here. She could see a man with shoulder-length hair talking to an old man, and then suddenly the old man vanished like smoke in the wind. She blinked, and then she saw the green fire in the eyes of the statues. All the statues. Stark talked to Stark. You stand in the presence of the old gods and the ancestors of the Starks. A voice seemed to say, a voice that she seemed to both feel and hear. The blood of the first men is still strong on Tarth. Still strong in you. And you must be strong. As strong as you were in a future that will not come to pass. And then the darkness took her again, and she fell. When it lifted again, she was standing in a tent. A figure was standing to one side with its back to her, as various pieces of green armor were piled to one side. And then her breath caught as a man stepped into the tent. It was Renly Baratheon, the man who had danced with her on Tarth, the man who had treated her with politeness that few others ever had, until she met the Blackfish. She peered at him shyly. He was a comely man, handsome, not as tall as his brother, the king, and... wait, as she came to look at him, she could see something in his eyes that made her pause. There was an emptiness there, a look of a man trapped by events. She could tell by the sounds from outside the tent that something terrible was happening here, something huge. The preparations before a battle, perhaps, and the ground seemed to shake under her feet, because the other person in the tent turned around, and it was her. She was in armor as well, good armor too. She held a green breastplate in her hands and helped Renly Baratheon to don it, moving carefully with the straps. The wind blew in through the flaps of the tent, and despite herself, she shivered. What was this? Why was she being shown this? And then, something black and terrible came through the very shadows at the base of the tent. Something evil. She could sense how wrong it was, even as she caught sight of it out of the corner of her eyes. She opened her mouth to call out, to warn that other version of her who was also reacting. But it was too late. A black tendril, like smoke but somehow sharper looking than Valyrian steel, slashed out at Renly, and suddenly there was blood everywhere. It gushed from his neck to his hip, and she stared in horror, before giving a wail of grief as he fell first to his knees and then onto his side, his mouth opening and closing. She wanted to fall to her knees to weep to help that other version of her who was desperately trying to tend to a dying man. "Why show me this?" she sobbed. "Why? To show you that magic is real. Magic is deadly. This was the work of a shadowbinder of usse. This was magic used for evil, in a future that will not now happen. Renly Baratheon's death was an empty one in this world, part of a tide of death that we avoided." She looked up at this, away from the now frozen tableau of death in front of her. This will not happen? No, this was a world that went wrong, a world where the call was never sent out, a world where death marched on the wall and no one cared about it in the South. We acted to change this. The scene changed again to a room in which a young man slept in a bed. He had red hair, and from the vague memories she had of something her father had said once, he looked like a Tully. She found herself shaking less from shock all of a sudden, and wondered just how she was seeing this. Was this like a dream? Had her ancestors had such visions? This is Robb Stark of Winterfell. The Starks are the key to everything. King of Winter of old, their blood was used to build the spells that made the wall. In that other future he died. Here he lives. We brought him back in time. The young man came awake with a shudder and a scream, his hands going to his chest, and then looking down at his bare skin in confusion, before staring around the room in total confusion. "I was at the twins," he muttered. I died." She stared at Robb Stark in awe. "You brought him back from the moment of his death. Then you are indeed gods. Did the Starks send out the call? Did Robb Stark?" His father did. An ancient artifact owned by his ancestors did it. The Starks know the threat now, as does the North. And those with the blood of the first men, you heard it, she had heard it. It still rang within her. The others come, the Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Tart awakens then, but much remains to be done. There is another future that must be avoided. More blackness, and then she was standing at the top of a tower. There were 4 grim-faced figures there, and again, some other version of her was one of them. She stared at that other version of her. Her hair was a little longer, but not overly so, and a thin scar marked her cheek. She wore a necklace of small antlers, but it was her eyes that had really changed. They were the eyes of someone who had seen far too much. She'd seen such eyes on the faces of veterans, those who had seen far too much. The other 3, well, judging by the ruined armor, one was bronze, Jon Royce. Another was Lord Arryn, looking old but still formidable. And the third was a black-haired, black-bearded man in dark leathers, with a nose that looked as if it had broken and then reset at some point. Brienne looked over the ramparts, and then felt herself paling. A steady stream of men and women were passing down the road to one side. Judging by the sun, they were all heading south, and they were desperate. She could see that many were gaunt with hunger and many others wounded, and that all were armed in some fashion. Even the women were carrying what looked like crude spears, with some kind of stone attached to the tips. "This is no longer a war that can be won with the old tactics," Lord Arryn said wearily. "The Knights of the Vale are no more. Heavy cavalry cannot charge the endless ranks of the dead, not without being swarmed over. And adding to them, this is a war of the First Men now. First Men magic and First Men tactics. I will return to King's Landing and send supplies. Lord Roose, this is your war now. Lord Castley, I have paid a part of your debt, as you asked. Your service to House Arryn and Westeros remains exemplary." The black-haired man smiled wryly. "Thank you, my lord. If I live to see her again, I doubt that she'll ever speak to me again for having her sent away. But given what's at stake, you have my thanks." Lord Arryn nodded in response, and then shook his head a little. "I would give all the gold in the world to see my son just for an instant. Winterfell holds out, my lord, despite all that the Night King has thrown at its walls," that other version of her said, "and Sir Brynden is with the king in River Run. Hope remains, though the thread grows thin. Grows thin indeed, with the Westerlands gone. Our western flank is gone, and the Martells are panicking. Well, all we can do is fight. Lord Roose, Your runes could provide us with the edge we need to delay them at the very least. I pray to the old gods that it will be so, the bearded man in the ruined armor growled. Much has been lost over the centuries, and even we in Roanstone do not know if it will be enough. We need more of everything. Valyrian steel, dragon glass, knowledge, and time. All four looked grim at that. Time, the other version of her said, with a shake of the head. The one thing we need more of? And then things seemed to shimmer and freeze. She looked around. This future is one that must not come to pass. We brought Robb Stark back in time because there was a war between men, a war that stilled the voices. The voices? The voices of those who worship us. The war stilled too many, as with this future. This is why it cannot happen. It must be stopped. You and Brynden Tully are the ones who must stop it. She stared around again. How? There are those who deny the call, who deny that the others have awoken again, who would place their own petty desires and politics over those of this world. They must be persuaded. We stand on the blade of a sword. The slightest thing can tip things one way or another. The Riverlands must be alerted, as must the Westerlands, to the threat that lies ahead. The North must be supported. And I have been chosen for this. Me and Sir Brynden. Why us? You both have a sense of honor and justice that few others have. You both persuade others to find that better part of themselves. You both believe that the world can be better. And in all the futures that we have seen you keep fighting, when others would despair and give up. She felt vaguely proud at that, but she also felt stunned. Very well, she said eventually. What will the cost be? The Green Man will tell you, for it has been his burden for too long. Prepare yourself. How can I prepare myself? But there was no answer. Instead, red fire seemed to fill her eyes and every part of her body. She opened her mouth to scream, and then she was back in front of the great heart tree, on her back, and feeling as if the weight of the world had been laid on her for a second. She groaned and opened her eyes and then turned to look for the Blackfish. He was next to her, and he seemed to be staring in horror at her, and his eyes were filled with red fire, which blazed brightly, and then vanished as if snuffed out. There was a long moment of silence, and then he croaked. Your eyes, they were filled with red fire. So were yours, she replied shakily. Did the old gods speak to you as well? They did. They showed me visions of the future. One in which there was a war, betrayal, treachery, and another in which the others were in the Riverlands and had overrun Casterly Rock. Shock roiled through her. You were in Riverrun with the king. Winterfell was under siege. He stared back at her. Yes, you saw it too? I saw myself with others. Lord Rocy, I think. Lord Aaron, and someone called Lord Castley. We were discussing the war against the others. I do not think that we were winning. The Blackfish stood with a groan and then peered at the sun. Well, several hours have passed. It feels like but a moment, despite all that we saw. But hours have passed. He held out a hand, and she reached out and grabbed it as she levered herself up. There was a moment of dizziness, and then it passed. It seems that we have a task to perform, she muttered, and a future to prevent. Aye, he replied, a dark and terrible one too. Those who heard the call but reject it must be persuaded. I feel that I am an odd choice for that, but it seems that we have been chosen together. I asked what the cost would be, she said as they both made for the path that would lead back to the building where they had started off from. I was told that the Green Man would tell us. Aye, he said again. Then his brow furrowed. From his hand? Well, he would know about cost. He was badly burned at one point. His voice, though, I have heard it before, or I have met him in passing before, at some point. When, though? It must have been a long time ago. A very long time ago. It was at that point that she realized something. This is not the same path that we came down. I mean, it goes in the right direction, but these are not the same trees. He peered around. You're right, he said in astonishment. Then he looked down at the ground. Wait, tracks. Someone small has been up and down here, and then frowned. Someone with odd feet, not enough toes. Odd. They pressed on, and after a while she could see the hall that they had left. What now felt like a lifetime ago. There was no one outside it, but as they entered they could see that the Green Man was still sitting by the fire, staring into it. As they approached he looked up, allowing the hood to shift a little. and Sierra Brynden stopped dead next to her, staring at the man as the blood drained from his face. "You're dead," he muttered eventually. "You're supposed to be dead. Everyone said that you died. After Summerhall," the green man smiled bitterly. "Oh, I wanted to die after that." He pulled the sleeve back for a moment to reveal the terrible burns on his hand. "I failed, you see. I failed to protect them, and not just from the fire." It was her turn to stare, and then she made the connection and felt her eyes widen and her nostrils flare. "But if you are who I think you are, that would make you more than 100. The green man smiled again, this time faintly. Being the green man has its peculiarities. After Summerhall, I came here seeking answers. I found them, but not the ones to the questions I was asking. I found bitter truths here and a measure of peace, as well as something else." The shock was still rattling through her mind, as she thought about the tales she had heard, and the shield that she had found in the armory of Tarth. I am Brienne of Tarth." The green man stood slowly, his back crackling as he straightened up. He was at least 6.5 feet tall, but from his slightly crooked back he had once been closer to 7 feet tall. "I know," he said, with a smile. "Hello, great-granddaughter, you have made me so proud. You did not just hear the call. You came to the Isle of Faces." She had no idea what to do or say or how to react, but the green man took the decision out of her hands by approaching and hugging her gently. "Come," he said, as he released her. "Both of you. Sit. You have been chosen. The old gods are with you. I sense it. They chose me too once. My time is passing. A new time is upon us, if we can survive the storm that is upon us, and a black and terrible one it is. You have been shown visions." "We have indeed," the blackfish muttered as he sat down by the fire. "The others come. We have people to persuade about the threat." "Aye," the green man agreed. "And I have one last fight in me, one last war. The green men will go forth from here for the first time in centuries to tend the groves of the first men, and the way must be made safe for our allies." She swapped a confused glance with the blackfish. "Allies?" The green man did not reply, but instead looked up. It was only then that she saw the little figures sitting in the rafters. Figures with green and gold eyes, and some with eyes of moss green or blood red, and both hope and wonder stirred in her heart.